weird under extrusion patterns, nozzles that break off, resin prints that you just don't want to clean, and spools melting in the oven. All that and more. Print Fix Friday, episode 35. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome to Print Fix Friday. It is the longest running weekly series on YouTube all about looking at print fails and how to fix them. If you want to get your fails looked at, you can do so by tagging us on all the social medias and using the hashtags PrintFix. We're gonna start off here with a fail that is an under extrusion fail, but it's happening in a predictable pattern. It's a fun one. We're then going to move into a nozzle that had its block knocked off, unfortunately. We then move into a failure from Norman over from Tested, and I feel his pain quite a bit. After that, we go into putting spools in the oven, something you should never do unless you have a good oven. And we finish everything off with a fail from my good friend Adam Hadley, who's been having troubles with getting multi-material and multicolor printing purge blocks to stick to his build plate. But you know what doesn't have a problem sticking to the build plate? My segue to our sponsor, 3D Musketeers. Print fails suck, and we know that here at 3D Musketeers. We help you suck less, and it's not because our printers are somehow magically more reliable, unless you're running Creality printers, and then yes, my printers are more magically reliable than yours. But we also have decades of experience under our belts here at 3D Musketeers to help deal with those print fails. We can help you diagnose your print fails via email, via a quick phone call, or even a free consultation that you can book right on our website without having to make any emails. It's pretty cool the way that we do it. And if we still can't figure out your problem or you're just done dealing with it, we can take over that printing for you. With almost 40 3D printers and over 40 years of experience, the pros at 3D Musketeers have the tools, knowledge, and ability to help you make awesome every single day. If you don't have any print fails for us to work on, but you still want to support what we do, a like and subscribe is absolutely free, and we would greatly appreciate it. But if you got a couple of bucks to spare and you want to kick it into that creator fund, you can do so over on Patreon. Patreon.com/3D Musketeers, with tiers starting as low as $1. And at the $10 tier and higher, you get access to our super secret Discord, where you get to hang out with all the other Musketeers on the team and ask us whatever the hell you want, whenever the hell you want. We got a fun little community going in that Discord, and I'm enjoying it. I'd love for more people to be a part of it. But, you know, we understand that not everyone can afford things, and that's okay. A like and subscribe absolutely helped us out. But enough of this call to action, helping us out, attempting to make this channel less of a loss leader. Let's move into these fails. I've been getting this weird pattern of under extrusion, and I cannot figure out where it comes from. I'm using standard settings for the CR10 in Cura. Could it be related to humid filament? No. No, it's not. This is so consistent that I would bet dollars to donuts it's your drive gear. Not only do I think it's your drive gear, there are two potential problems here. One, verify your drive gear is actually properly seated onto the motor shaft itself. So like make sure that the set screw is tight and all of that. Make sure it doesn't spin, right? You tighten down the set screw and it just keeps tightening and tightening and tightening. You've got to strip set screw and it's time to get a new extruder gear. But what I think is more likely here is we either have a extruder gear that has not been drilled in the center, so it's not grabbing the filament around the entire circumference, or got quite a few clogged teeth that are keeping the filament from moving through. Let's take a look at the comments. It's a fairly new one. About 10 hours ago it was posted. I like this one. Yep, I think your extruder gear is not center or is wobbling. It's exactly what I'm saying. Only one side is properly gripping the filament and the other side can't. That's why you get successive under extrusion. I absolutely agree here, and it looks like I'm not the only one. Print speed is 50, that's fine. 215 and 50, that's also fine. The repetitive pattern tells me maybe some periodic resistance feeding the filament, maybe a stuck spool or jammed or knotted filament on the spool. No, That is not what's causing this. Because this is a Bowden system, it's not going to deal with some of the direct drive issues where if you did have knotted filament, that would be a thing. And oh yeah, by the way, if you have knotted filament, it's not from the factory, it's from your own bonehead mistakes. When you take spools off of your printer, make sure you properly secure the end of that filament, because if you let it go, it's gonna end up tangling itself up, and then you're going to blame everybody but yourself. It's not physically possible to be knotted from the factory. Think about it. It's a continuous roll of filament. Unless there's a break in your filament, there's no way for it to be knotted, assuming it's on a spool. So the only way that it could be knotted is if you did it. So that's all I gotta say about that. And jammed, no, because it's too consistent for a jam. Unless there is, for some reason, perfectly well-spaced pieces of metal that are slowly being extruded through the printer, but I'm gonna hedge a bet and say no. The OP says, I don't know why, but the problem solved itself. My best guess as to why, after reading some comments, is the last time I changed my nozzle because of a clog after I pressed too hard against the Bowden tube, causing it to buckle or misalign inside the hot end. No. Nope. No, it's your extruder gear. And you might have gotten lucky. So if they've just kind of fixed itself after a little bit, my guess and my final answer will be that you had some clogged teeth. If it was an oblong extruder gear or it was loose on the motor shaft itself, this problem would consist continually throughout the print. But if it was just some clogged teeth that were causing the filament to slip or realistically not grip, and eventually that solved itself, well, hey, no harm, no foul. But what can you do to solve this problem? What are the big things, especially if you're running a printer that has just failed to print because of a jam, has only one drive side, so instead of a dual gear system like is on the Prusas, maybe you have a standard feeding system like you have on an Ender or CR10, where it is just feeding from one side and there's an idler applying force against the filament to your motor shaft. Those ones, you have to play with tension quite a bit. And actually, Stefan over at CNC Kitchen just did a great video all about extruder tension. I highly recommend you guys check it out. We'll link to it in the description because it kind of makes simple what has been a pretty much a dark art in this industry. You just kind of got it okay, and if it runs, it runs. We never really measured extruder tension, and we never really plotted how that affected your flow rate. Stefan does an amazing job at plotting all of those things. Now, this is a good point here that the end of the PTFE can be deformed and causing clogs, but when we're dealing with something this consistent, I don't think so. My money is still on the crap on the extruder drive gear. I'm not saying it's impossible. Maybe it is a little bit oblong. Maybe it wasn't feeding through because the Bowden tube is crappy. I don't know. But if you didn't know this, Bowden tubes are a wear item. It's actually why we recommend having spare Bowden tube around. And I'm not talking the cheap stuff you get anywhere. Go get yourself some good Capricorn Bowden tube. We're going to have a video coming up here relatively soon, hopefully in the next couple of months, where we're going to test regular Bowden tube versus cap tube. Get subscribed if you want to see that, and let us know down in the comments if there's anything you want us to test specifically about the cap tubes versus regular Bowden tube. It's a bummer that this happened, but I'm glad that it resolved itself. I would definitely go back and look at verifying what's going on with your extruder drive gear. Make sure it's clean. And no, it's not humid filament. First nozzle change equals printer KO. Oh, this sucks. This sucks so bad. Do you see the problem here, ladies and gentlemen? The nozzle has left the building. Let's see if OP did the thing that I think they might have done, which is do it when it's cold. The one big thing you want to do when you are changing out nozzles is make sure that you do it when the printer is hot. If you don't do that, it's gonna get stuck, whether it's your nozzle, your heat block, heat break, something is going to break if you try to do it cold. Individual said it was set to 285, so that is interesting. 285 is where you want to be for a Prusa. Do not set a printer without an all-metal hot end, 285 degrees centigrade, especially if you have birds. This is something that we don't talk about in this industry enough. PTFE-lined hot ends and birds equal dead bird. Birds are incredibly, incredibly sensitive to formaldehyde, which is what is off-gassed when you heat up PTFE too hot. It will kill them. And you don't want that, especially because most birds are not cheap. And that's not nice, right? So if you do have birds, make sure you have an all-metal hot end, because otherwise you could be risking the life and safety of your animal. That's not good. But what they're dealing with is the hot end that they're attempting to take apart, right? They're trying to take the nozzle off, and you can see I cannot for the life of me get this apart, but because it is cold, I should be able to take off the heat sink. This all needs to be done when the printer is hot, because all the metal is going to expand and you're able to take everything apart. 285 is where you want it to be. That is the correct temperature according to Prusa, as we see. But I do believe we might have had a human error here. Again, it is awkward to loosen something above you, and you have to think about the direction at which you're moving it. In fact, I like to do this with a ratcheting system, because if we use like a small handheld ratchet, I'm not going to put too much torque on it, but I will guarantee that I'm moving this thing in the right direction. Because if you were tightening it rather than loosening it, of course you're going to snap the nozzle off. I don't care how hot it is, because it's not going to go any further. It's hit the heat break itself. This is not something that is covered by the warranty, right? And this is a Prusa. Prusas have really, really good warranties. It's not covered under warranty. This is absolutely usage outside of what is expected for a printer. At least in my opinion. Prusa might still honor it. Who the hell knows? But what you can do is go ahead, remove the heater, remove the thermistor, pull out the heatsink, right? So you want to unscrew the heatsink, and then you can try, if you're lucky, to spin out the actual piece of brass. But the nice thing is, heat blocks, pretty cheap. Nozzles, pretty cheap. Just buy new ones. You can try to use an extractor or a tap and die set and just use a tap to get in there and grab it and then back it out. Some people use left-handed drill bits. There's a bunch of different ways to removing stuck pieces of nozzle. We actually covered one a while back where I used an angle grinder, which does get the nozzle part out, but it is a point of no return for the rest of the components. We see here that there are a lot of comments about replacing the hot end with a new hot end. There's really no need. Honestly, there really isn't a need here. You can just replace the heat block and the nozzle if you really want it. They're saying that they were loosening it, holding the hot end with a wrench and using a 7mm socket on the nozzle, which is the right way to do it. If for some reason you were trying to loosen it and you slipped, chances are you could shear a brass nozzle. It's a brass nozzle, right? It's like, it's not that hardcore, right? They're quite delicate when you look at, you know, components overall, right? Brass is a pretty soft metal. And I can see that they decided that a total replacement was $68 on Amazon, and just to send it. I feel that. OP, send me the broken hot end. I'll fix it. I don't care. I'll even pay for the shipping. Because that's an easy win, right? It's really easy to get the old piece out, but I would keep it around. I would learn a tough lesson. I would look at extracting that nozzle and having a spare hot end when you need it. It's always good to have something like that around when you do need it. And this is a good point, that the big sockets and wrenches will draw a lot of heat out of the hot end, which means your tip may not be as hot as it needs to be. Just the tip, mind you. Just like the tip to subscribe. We don't do it by the book. I hold the hot end with the pliers that the printer comes with because it's good enough. And yeah, you generally don't want to have any metal wrench on there for very long because it'll just sink the heat right out of the hot end. And you'll be able to see that actually. It's interesting. Even when you put a socket on the nozzle, you can watch the temperature of your printer start dipping. This can actually cause the printer to go into thermal runaway because it's not going to be able to heat itself faster than you can pull the heat out of it, which is thankfully protected by Prusa, right? They've got thermal runaway protection and all of that, but it is something to note, something you should be aware of. So how do we avoid this? Really, the big thing, lefty loosey, righty tighty, from underneath, not from your perspective, from underneath. And if you can't think in that direction, literally raise the hot end all the way up so you make sure that you're tightening it the right way. So you can literally, it's like, get under there and make sure it's right. Obviously, unload your filament when you do that. If you do get a situation like this, heat the printer back up, try to use an extractor of some sort to pull this piece out, but always having a spare hot end is a good thing to have around, or spare parts, because this could be a pretty easy swap if you had a heat block laying around. And I feel this, I've been there before. I've never specifically snapped a nozzle, but I have had nozzles break on me right there. Actually, our Lulzbot Taz 6 broke a nozzle mid-print. To this day, I have no idea how it occurred, but I came back to a big mess and half of the nozzle on the print bed. It's still a mystery. It'll never be solved. Next up, we got Norman Chan from Tested. A lot of you guys know Norm from Tested. And he's got a print failure here. He says, it's insane how productive I can force myself to be to put off cleaning up a messy failed resin print. Same. I feel this in my soul. Resin prints they kind of suck to clean. You definitely have cured resin inside that vat, and it's going to suck to deal with it. But let's back up to why this failure occurred. Then let's look at how to fix it. This is an exposure and or bed leveling issue. I'm gonna hedge my bet and say they're testing one of the brand new AnyCubic resin printers that have, instead of clear FEP, they're using a kind of matte translucent FEP rather than transparent as a means to help diffuse the UV light underneath the printer. Do I like that? No, that's really cheaping out, but whatever, you call it what it is. Or it could be that there's crap on your build plate. If there's like oil or crap on your build plate, you know, like oil from your hands touching it or something like that, your parts won't adhere well. But because we're seeing it peel in the same direction like that, I'm likely to lean toward exposure. There's a lot of force involved with ripping parts off the FEP to the point of where you can actually hear it on a lot of mono 3D printers. If we can find the clip of that, we'll put it right here on screen. But we went over this a couple of times in previous videos, as well as a resin support video where we talked all about making custom supports. This does suck though. A great way to deal with these problems is to start by doing test prints. TableFlip Foundry actually has an amazing test print that helps you really dial in those exposure settings quite well. I think better than a lot of them out there, to be honest. I'd like to actually have the TableFlip Foundry people here on the podcast. So if you guys are watching, hit me up in the comments. Love to have you on the podcast, kind of talk about what you went through to design that piece, because it's kind of taken the industry by storm, and I like when the industry does that kind of thing. But we can look at reducing your lift speed. Some resins, especially casting resins, like to have a very, very low lift speed. This makes sure that as you're pulling off your FEP, you're not just trying to rip it off like a Band-Aid, you're going nice and slow. So it's a gradual peel rather than a tear, because that tear can cause issues like what you see here. Maybe some extra exposure on your first couple of layers would help this, but something else I'm noticing and want to point out, it is considerably darker on what appears to be the first layer than the other layers. I'm hedging a bet that Norm has had this resin in that vat for a while and he didn't stir it. This can be a big problem. Those of you that work with tinted resins know that over time, all the colorant separates from the photopolymer resin itself, and you have to remix it. And that could be done normally. Some people use a plastic scraper. We love the silicone brushes. We did a whole video on resin tools and tips and that kind of thing. We'll card to it so you guys can see it. But this one, I think, is from the pigment being at the bottom of the tank and not throughout the material, because the pigment is going to have less photopolymer resin, therefore it's going to stick less to a build plate. So it's something to be aware of too. And like this can happen within 24 hours of leaving resin in a vat. So if you just leave it overnight, chances are it's gonna sink. It even can happen on really big resin prints, and it's why printers like the SL1 have the vat tilt method. And that's not just to reduce the FEP tearing strength, but it also does help mix the resin. And machines like the Formlabs Form 2 and the Form 3 have ways to mix up that resin so it's always staying in solution rather than falling out. Something very important to note with resin printers is that you must make sure that your resin is properly agitated and not too pissed off before you go ahead and do the print. But I've been there before. I mean, we've had fails left in printers for months, but because we have multiple resin printers, I can literally just start the print on a different one in a different color. It's fine. And it seems like Uncle Jesse, Joel Telling, as well as Barnacles all understand how to do it. And yeah, Glove up and clean it up, a Pyro Design says, and I do have to agree. Getting some good chemical-resistant gloves will be pivotal to making this a little bit easier to do. That way you're not really getting too messy, but nitrile will work in the meantime. No help needed, just a warning about dehydrating filament in the oven. Yep. Here's the thing with electric and even gas ovens. They're not designed to hold temperature as well as you think. When you heat your oven to 350 degrees, it's probably telling you it's preheated around 300 or 325. Mine will start telling me it's preheated around 275 because it has decided that that was its last cycle of heat on, and it should bring it all the way up to 350. Unlike 3D printers that use PID, ovens tend to use bang, bang, which is on or off. Bang on, bang off. Whereas PID will modulate on and off very quickly to produce a frequency that is effectively 70%, 50%, 40%, whatever. And that means that your temperature fluctuations inside of a large oven can be quite considerable and something that you should always keep an eye on. I'm not a fan of drying things in an oven. And this was a 300 Fahrenheit oven. That is way too hot for what I'm going to guess is, let's see, can we see it? 190C to 220, so that is PLA. And 200C and 300 Fahrenheit is quite hot. That is hotter than the melting temperature of ABS, which is what the spools are made of. We've got a regular plastic spool and a cardboard spool, both from Printed Solid, one of my favorite filament manufacturers at the moment. And they weigh roughly the same. I would say the plastic spool is a little bit heavier. But the thing is with these plastic spools, they take up a ton of space. And while they're awesome to give away to all of your neighbors around the holiday season, because they're great for wrapping up lights, they're great for short extension cords, really good for stuff like that, I much prefer the cardboard rolls. Not only can you pull them apart and more easily store the empties, but they cost less, their environmental impact is less, and they're much more easily recycled. Polystyrene or ABS are common materials for this, and both of which are not all that nice plastics. In fact, ABS is made of liquefied dinosaurs, and polystyrene is pretty much the same. It's oil-based, and that means that it's a pain in the ass to recycle, and a lot of places don't even recycle this stuff. It doesn't recycle well, versus something like cardboard, which recycles quite a bit better. And yes, there are maybe some glues and things here that aren't the greatest, but when you look at the environmental impact, it's quite a bit lower with your cardboard. And Printed Solid does something that I find quite interesting. They put a steel ring in here. That's what holds everything together, and it is really strong. Like, it's really tough to get these spools apart, which sucks because it'd be a lot easier for me to break them down. But the steel is what holds everything together, but it also allows one side to turn while the other side is stationary. And that means you never have to deal with having a long pigtail of filament outside of your spool. You can move this to where your pigtail is and have just a little bit poking out. That makes storage way easier, right? That's a huge benefit. And of course, if you can pop these things apart, which they're really tough to get apart, which is good. It means they're not going to fall apart during shipping. But when you do get them apart, it makes it really easy to separate into easily recycled containers. But the other thing that, and Dave talked about this on the podcast that we had him on, we'll card to it so you guys can see it, is that it's metal in here, right? The ring is metal. So when you're on plastic spool holders or things like that, you're not dealing with that crappy corrugated cardboard. You're dealing with a piece of metal, which is way better. These spools are effectively reusable. I like them, and I want to see more manufacturers using them. Let me know what you guys think of the cardboard spools down in the comments. I really like them. I don't know if anyone else does, though. But in a case like this, if you don't have a dehydrator or means to easily dry out your filament, you're gonna kind of have to watch it. Get a good thermometer that you can put in an oven, preferably a digital one, so you can just run the probe outside. It would make things a little bit more reliable, at least so you can vent the oven when it's getting too hot. But it's also PLA, which doesn't really need drying unless it's starting to pop. And if it sounds like a bowl of Rice Krispies, then it's time to dry it. But generally speaking, it's not going to be a problem. I still don't know why the industry has such a fascination with wet filament when it's considerably less of a problem than most people think. Last but not least, we got a fail from our buddy Adam Holly. He's a former podcast guest. A lot of podcast guests this round of PrintFix Friday, but check out his episode there. He works with Lightburn Laser, the best software for laser cutters as far as I'm concerned, and no one's paying me to say these things. It's just really damn good software. He says, I hate purge towers. There must be a better way. I realize I could make the tower larger so it doesn't pop off easily, but it's such a waste. Yeah. Purge towers kind of suck. It's the thing about the MMU, the Prusa multi-material upgrade, that a lot of people don't talk about, which is the amount of waste involved with the color changes. Now, there's not a lot of great solutions out there. Of course, there's the Mosaic palette system, which I've played with a palette too, a little bit. It was a friend's, but I've never used a palette long term. Mosaic, if you're watching, I'd love to try one. I think it might be fun to do some interesting full color 3D prints and compare it to an actual full color 3D printer and see how they align, especially with the Palette 3 Pro that can do 8 individual colors. But we can see what happened here is that it knocked his purge block over, and then the purge block came over and looks like, yep, caused a skip step on the benchy. An otherwise really effing clean print, like really clean print, the purge block just didn't stick. And yeah, you could maybe put a brim on it or something like that. It's just a bummer, man. Ways to solve it, right? Brim on your purge block, more Z-hop, and slower speeds. But I know this printer that Adam is building, I've been kind of seeing him build it in the background for quite some time on some calls that I hang out on. It's a monster. Like, look, it's got dual rails for the X and Y. It's kind of ridiculous. This printer is what happens when you gave an engineer time. Yeah, it's a bummer. I just wanted to show it off because even with expensive builds, expensive printers, expensive custom printers by people that are experts, right? Adam is an expert. Failures do still occur, and failure is always an option. And here at PrintFix Friday, we try to make it less of a problem. I know Adam is working on a solution for this, and I'm sure he will find one that fits his needs perfectly. That's all we got for you guys today. Let me know down in those comments what you think of the fails. If there's any specific fails that you want us to cover or more in-depth subjects, we can do specific videos just on that. But stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones. And as always, keep making awesome. Have a good one. Looking for a maker mark? Tell me about your future. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video, and a massive thank you goes out to all of our Patreon and YouTube channel member supporters whose names are listed right next to me at the $5 tier and higher. It's actually scrolling now. Thank you guys for your support. If you guys do want to support the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/3D Musketeers with tiers starting as low as $1. We graciously appreciate any support you can provide us. Right below me will be the entire PrintFix Friday series where we go through print fails and how to fix them. And right next to that will be the printer maintenance series. Seriously, go look at the printer maintenance series if you haven't. It's useful, I promise. I'll see you guys down in those comments and in the next one. Take care.